This is the Wake Up Podcast powered by Veeam. I'm your host, Rick Vanover, the Rickatron, and today, sharing fresh perspectives to wake up to is a good friend, Zeus Kerravala.
Yes.
Did I get it right?
Yeah, close enough.
Close enough. Usually it's the other way around.
Yeah.
I'm on your show, but now you're on my show.
Yeah, we
the
do a little
Veeam show.
flip the script here,
I
huh?
love it. I love it. But Zeus, take a moment, introduce yourself to everyone.
Yeah, so Zeus Kerravala. I run my own research firm. I've been doing that 16 years. I was head of research for Yankee Group before that. And actually, unlike a lot of analysts, I've actually got a practitioner background. I spent time at a VAR. I spent time as a CIO. So I understand the problems of all the people watching the show. Not an easy job. So.
Well, I can tell you, when we do the Zcast or the Zcast, as we call it, he asked the good questions.
Yeah.
So the practitioner background, his current perspective is truly why I invited you on the show, Zeus. I really admire your perspective.
I appreciate that, Rick.
So I'm going to start with a big challenge. First of all, I've asked a lot of the guests this season about this. And, correct me if I'm wrong. I know you see a lot of companies, you see a lot of tech brands. The challenge I have is that data may not be trustworthy in this AI era. Talk to me. What do you think?
Well, that's an understatement.
Yeah.
So there's lots of data out there. And I think it's been said over and over again that data is the new oil, the new gold, the fuel that powers AI, things like that. So you're only as good as the data that you have. And I think in data science is an axiom that says good data leads to good insights, right? Well, what do we have today? How many companies would actually say they have good data? In fact, other than security, data quality comes up as the number one inhibitor to AI. So everyone's rushing to do AI, but no one's got the confidence that the data's good. And part of that, there's multiple reasons for that. One is just people get lazy when they put data in, right? So think of Salesforce data, stuff like that. People tend to, just put in minimal amounts. But then there's a lot of data that's been corrupted. There's multiple copies of data. There's just data for the most part is a mess. And when I talk to companies, they understand that, and they're going through these big data cleansing projects and things like that before they can move forward with AI. But I actually think that we're gonna see who's got good data and who doesn't by who's able to execute on AI quickly.
Well, that's really a compelling angle on who's able to execute on AI. I will tell you, Zeus, that's one of the fundamental tenets of that big news from 2025 from Veeam of acquiring security AI. We're really seeing this opportunity where organizations need to just get a hold of their data. I love how you call it data quality. That's a word that I've used internally, but it really speaks to the security of it, the compliance of it. Also speaks to, some of the different elements around permissions and regulatory footprint.
And think about that.
Yeah.
AI generates more data. So if you're using bad data for your AI to generate more data, then you're just creating more bad data on top of bad data, which leads to more bad data down the road. And so it winds up becoming this mountain that you build of data. And also the silos are also bad too. So if good data leads to good insights, and bad data obviously bad insights, silos of data lead to fragmented insights. And I think that's the worst thing that you could have, because we're going to have AI agents telling us things that are maybe conflicting, right? One agent tells us this, another agent tells us this. And so if you don't have good data, you don't have good AI.
I think that's spot on. And then the other side of that is if we think about that famously shared recent report from MIT's RAND research group about 90 or 95%.
95%.
95. Never quote an analyst because he knows. 95%.
Put it on a grid.
Yeah, 95% of AI projects fail. And I actually read through that report, Zeus. It was actually fascinating that there was some revelations like off-the-shelf AI for some is good enough, and it's not worth like going through a big, long project. And you talk about this like perpetuation of bad data, bad outputs, and bad results. I think that's very real, and I think that organizations need to work backwards in the supply chain of data to really get that quality right to then go forth. And I would I'd recommend starting small. Get a small example of a success in your organization with good, clean data. Prove the point that, hey, we can do something agentic or AI-driven, and then scale that. Prove the concept. Don't boil the ocean up front.
No, it's a good lesson. In fact, if you look at a lot of parallels are drawn to the automotive industry because, we have getting closer to, level 5 self-driving cars. None of those companies, I live in, San Mateo, and Zeus is down by there, right? And you would see them driving the same 1 mile loop over and over and over again until they nailed that and got it right. They didn't try driving from here to, LA or something day one, right? They started small, they had confidence in that data, and grew from there. And I think in every organization, there are pockets of good data. And that's a great place to start, and then you grow from there. And I think in the meantime, you can cleanse your data, you can make sure that the quality of the other sources are good. But if you, I've used this expression, chip shots, not moonshots. If you try a big moonshot type AI project, you are going to be in that 95% that fail. And it's not that the technology doesn't work, it's just that you tried something that was too big for your organization to consume. So do something small, be able to measure the ROI, and use that success to build on other successes. And that's the best, as a practitioner, through that lens, you have to be, people are going to look at you for success. And if you can demonstrate those small successes, that'll lead to bigger successes down the road.
And that is something to wake up to.
Yeah.
So, Zeus, you travel a lot. I thought I traveled a lot, but you were catch me if you can in human form.
I don't want people to know where I am.
Well, no, you share everything. What are you talking
Well, that's
about?
true.
I mean, everybody
Here
knows
I am.
where you're at. I thought one of your more interesting travels was recently into Davos at the World Economic Forum. And I was following some of your coverage there. And, trust seemed like it was a big theme. Talk to us about that, not just from the World Economic Forum, but really across the market as you see it today.
Yeah, so WEF was interesting in that every conversation I had there had some element of trust, whether it was political leader, technology company, average citizen, when thinking about AI. And obviously, trust manifests itself differently. There's government to government, business to business, business to consumer, right? But I think as far as within the context of AI, and we've already seen this, Rick, like people talk a lot about when they run things through generative AI tools, you get bad data. And then if you don't trust it, you're not going to use it, right? And I think this is where it does take a long time to build trust and a very short time to erode trust. And so it does come up over and over and again. And I think, like I said, within the context of AI, there's multiple layers to trust. There's making sure that your data is good, making sure it's secure, making sure the right guardrails are in place, making sure that as I try and do things, I'm not putting my company at risk. Even I remember out of a conversation with your leadership about, as they brought AI into this company, they needed to put multiple layers in place because there's some things that only the executive team needs to know about, where there's some things the employees need to know about. So building trust within AI systems isn't just, I just flip a switch and go buy my, AI trust tool, right? There's multiple layers to that. And I think it's, in fact, if you saw NVIDIA's GTC and Jensen had that 5-layer cake, so you got to build trust at every one of those layers, but within those layers, there's multiple layers. And I think it's a very complicated task, but it starts with the data.
I think that it's also important because if you look at NVIDIA, look at what you saw at the World Economic Forum, it's really this convergence of technology into the economy and broadly into society.
Yeah.
And you could go down the rat hole of how that affects, everything from news and media and social media and things like that. But I think what we do here at Veeam is really around just the heart of the data, building the trust of the data. We're in the market to do that. For those of you watching the podcast, trust me, if you haven't seen Veeam lately, definitely take a look.
I actually think trust will become the new customer experience in a way, because like if you look at how brands differentiate themselves, 20 years ago, it was product quality or the people friendly, things like that. About 10 years ago, customer experience became the number one brand differentiator.
Yeah, NPS came up.
Yeah, and I think moving forward, it is going to be, can you establish the trust with your consumer base? Because every brand is going to have its own agentic shopping agent. You're going to be talking to an agentic agent to buy your car, buy vacation, go on vacation. But if you don't trust it, you're not going to use it. And I think how brands establish that trust, to me, is going to be fascinating to see. But I think that is going to be how companies differentiate themselves. You can argue that it's part of the broader customer experience spectrum, but I think it is a different discipline.
No, I think this is one of those top shelf measures. I mean, I think you're onto something. I think it's going to be more significant than we may know, and you may actually find. This is me making a prediction. I don't know. I guess I'm allowed to do that on this show. But my thought here is you might even see brands that you wouldn't expect come out of nowhere and really nail that trust factor, right? So I think that's an opportunity in the market.
Oh no, I think that's absolutely true, and I think you've seen that play out, in other segments of retail when brands, they do. You think Amazon, right? They don't argue with you about if you buy something on Amazon, it's verified, and if you have a problem, that they'll take it back. That's a much different experience than what we're used to historically, and so we default to it because it's something we trust.
I love that. That's a great example, and especially with e-commerce, because it becomes a trust, an expectation, a comfort, and it's evidently working. They're doing something right, that's for sure. So Zeus, I have a kind of a different line of questions for you here, and the thought is you talk to leaders of the tech elite, and you're plugged into all the different trends. I mean, seriously, this guy is everywhere. But what would you advise someone if you were in a board meeting of a big tech company, small tech company, a new tech company? What kind of warnings or smoke signals or broad stroke advice in some of these circumstances would you take to a boardroom?
Yeah, this era, Rick, reminds me a lot of when I started my career, and we had board members. I remember coming to me when I was a CIO saying, we have to have some kind of internet strategy. And I'd ask them, I was a bank, what do you want to do? Do you want to allow online trading? Do you want to allow people to look at, and I go, no, it's too risky. It's like, well, what? And they didn't know, right? And so I think, first of all, you have to know the problem you're trying to solve. And I think right now, board members they read in the media all the time about AI, but they don't really understand the problems it's trying to solve. So you have to do your homework and understand what it is that you're trying to solve. I do think you need to get started quickly. I think in this case, technology, well, you know this, you've been around a long time. Technology today moves faster than we've ever seen before. And there's that expression, some people make things happen, some people watch things happen, right? And so I think with these AI initiatives, if you're standing still, you're falling way behind. And so you need to move quickly. And the third one, though, is start with a manageable project with a measurable ROI. And that was the one thing I didn't like with the MIT report, right? It was a little bit misleading because the tech does work. And in fact, I wrote a follow-up piece to it on CIO.com where I mentioned that AI failure isn't a technology problem, it's a leadership issue. And the leaders of the company need to set the example and set the agenda. But they need to understand, like I said, the problem they're trying to solve, and they have to make sure it's an area where you have a measurable outcome, right? And so, for those watching this, when you talk to your tech vendors, the Veeams or whoever, ask them, what is the outcome you're going to provide me, at the end of this project? And then that makes it easier to be able to measure the success, because nothing will fuel more AI like a success of a small project moving forward. But if you don't know what it is that you're trying to measure, then you're doomed to fail, right? And nobody wants that. So
That is actually fantastic advice. I want to gravitate on the first point you mentioned around the risk. And let me tell you an example. Some family of mine work for the largest retail grocery company in the U.S. And if you look at, sometimes industries want to make a change, or sometimes they have to make a change. And there was a story told to me about this organization where it went into COVID. They had to change, everything from, online grocery shopping and delivery services and things like that. There was a phrase that stuck with me, and it was, they gave us opportunities to try something new in spite of the risk. That was literally what one of the holiday gathering type of comments. What's your take on the risk of that? Because your other point, you will be left behind. I totally agree with that. How would you speak to the risk to someone who's maybe not sure?
Well, yeah, I do think in every one of these tech transitions, Rick, we reach a point where the risk of not doing anything is far greater than the risk of failure moving forward. In fact, I think you do need to have some failures. You can't have, I think from a product perspective, if you try, if you never fail, you're not being risky enough. But again, it has to be in an area that's measurable, and you understand, you can get the lessons learned and understand why you failed, right? That's different than throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and just hoping something sticks. If they're calculated, measured trials and they don't work, well, then go figure out why they didn't, and you can either decide that that's not the right path for us, or if we try it over, we'll do it. So again, taking a parallel from the automotive industry, the self-driving cars didn't work coming out day one. They had lots of problems. I'm sure there's been lots of, crashes in labs and things like that, but then they get better over time. And I think one of the things that helps companies today is the rise of physical AI and simulation technology. So if you're, your warehouse and you want to put an AI project in place, you can simulate these things today in AI environments, right, in virtual environments before you roll them into production. So you got to think differently, though, right? You're not running the same kind of business, and you have to use all these different available tools to you to be able to try things. But there's great ways to simulate business outcomes now, and I think, to me, that's the key word, right? You have to think along those lines of business outcomes. In fact, at the NRF show this year, I met with the CIO of L'Oreal, right, pretty big company, and he said he went to that show this year specifically looking at it as a business outcome show, not a technology show, and I think that's the mindset that our leaders have to be in. But some failure is okay, right? It's just that you got to learn those lessons as to why you failed.
It reminds me of the phrase, Star Wars. The greatest teacher failure is Yoda, right? And you have to learn something from a failure. And I'll take another parallel from football. One of the great football coaches likes to say, you can't win every game, but you can learn something from every game. Yeah. And I think modern mainstream technology projects need to really approach it the same way. And then further, an individual who's wanting to further their career, because you also got to work. There's an individual goal, but then there's also like a personal development goal. This is even personal career advice at that point. So that is fantastic.
Yeah, in fact, what I tell people at a personal level, if you're doing things today that you don't think are going to be strategic to your resume moving forward, stop doing them. Find a way to get AI to automate them out of your job and move on to whatever that next thing is. We've seen these tech transitions over and over again leave people who didn't want to change, behind. Server managers didn't like virtualization, mainframe managers didn't like Windows. And the ones that embraced the future were fine, and the ones that didn't got left behind.
Yeah, server huggers didn't like the cloud.
Yeah.
That's a phrase, server huggers, I'm telling you. Zeus, I knew it was a good idea bringing you onto this show. Thank you so much.
No, thanks, Rick.
All right, that wraps this episode of the Wake Up Podcast powered by Veeam. Find this episode and more at a podcast platform near you, and more information at veeam.com.